BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Yesterday on the channel, we were talking about the murder of Cecelia Shepard. It was September 27th, and that, of course, is the anniversary of a very famous incident in Zodiac activity, the Lake Berryessa attack on Brian Hartnell and Cecelia, of course. Now, I thought that we talked a lot about the murder as well as the Zodiac killer, but I also thought that it could be a good thing to do to talk about the life of Cecelia Shepard, because that was originally what I had planned. But when you're talking about a victim in the Zodiac killer case, very frequently the conversation often shifts over to discussing the Zodiac killer. And today we're going to do a little bit of that as well, but I would also like to say some things about Cecelia Shepard. I should say that this is being recorded on September 28th. As I said, yesterday was the anniversary of Lake Berryessa, but it's really tomorrow that will be September 29th, the day that Cecelia Shepard died. And we even had one source here, like if you were just to put her name into Google, it's actually IMDb of all things. It says Cecelia Shepard was born on January 1st, 1947 in India. She died on September 29th, 1969 in Lake Berryessa, Napa County, California. She survived the stabbing. She survived the attack and was able to give the police several pieces of information about the Zodiac killer, but she would pass away from her injuries 2 days later in the hospital. And I thought we could go through some of the sites. There was even a page on Angel Fire about Cecelia Shepard and Brian Hartnell. Do you remember Angel Fire? I mean, this is like an antique in terms of the internet, a relic from ancient times. Angel Fire. And what they want to say here, as well as they discuss some things about the Lake Berryessa attack, which of course took place on a Saturday. Cecelia Shepard passed away on a Monday, so we're staying consistent with Zodiac activity. The killer is operating on nights, holidays, evenings, and weekends. Nothing really during business hours, 9 to 5, so that can tell you something about the Zodiac killer, possibly. But Cecelia Shepard and Brian Hartnell were at Lake Berryessa on September 27th, 1969. And yes, just to read some things here from angelfire.com. Shepard and Hartnell were sitting at Lake Berryessa near Napa, California. While they were sitting on their blanket, Brian heard something in the bushes. Cecelia became frightened, but it didn't bother them until an intruder started walking up upon them. This intruder was wearing a costume. Brian turned around, and the trio started a conversation. The intruder asked for their money, but Brian just laughed, saying he only had some change, but he could have given more if he had wanted to. And this is something from the Lake Berryessa transcript that we did on this channel, where Brian even says that he would write a check if he could get in touch with the guy later on. Figuring that this was going to be a robbery, Brian conversed with the man. The intruder told him that he was a convict and he was on his way to Mexico and he needed money for a ride. Brian offered the man a check and his phone number, as to get in contact with him. According to one source, Brian, with all honesty, wanted to help the man. Cecelia, at the same time, was extremely nervous. Brian started toying with the intruder, playing his game. The intruder asked Cecelia to tie up Brian, and tie him to the tree, actually, it says, which with some hesitation she did, but very loosely. And as far as I know, in every other thing, this is the first time I've heard tied to a tree. No, they were hog-tied, like where the feet are tied to the hands behind the back. Perhaps that is just something that is inaccurate here. And the intruder later tightened the ropes and then ties up Cecelia as well. From this point, there are conflicting stories. One source says that the intruder went on to attack Cecelia first. Well, we don't really think that's true. But Brian told the attacker that he couldn't stand to see Cecelia hurt and to hurt him first, which the attacker complied with. Well, as far as we understand, Brian Hartnell was stabbed first 7 times, and then Cecelia was stabbed 10 times. And somebody left a rather insightful comment once when he was saying that perhaps the killer's adrenaline kicked in just a little bit more, and that's the reason why Cecelia Shepard was stabbed more. But people just look at those numbers, 7 and 10, and they begin to think that the killer was really trying to show a little bit more rage when he was murdering the female victim. But what we can also say about Cecelia Shepard is that she was 22 at the time, and that is one of the older ages that we're going to see in the Zodiac Killer mystery. The oldest victim in the Zodiac Killer case is Paul Stein, who was murdered on October 11th of 1969, and he was 29. I just was so not only baffled by that, but I was just perplexed, and I just thought it was an oddity in the case as well, as if there aren't enough oddities in what is going on with the Zodiac Killer mystery. But I was like, we have the younger victims, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, and then we have some of the older ones. It's like Brian Hartnell and Cecelia Shepard. Once again, Cecelia was 22, and then the oldest victim is the final victim. It's almost like they're going from young to old, but not quite, not perfectly, because Brian Hartnell was even younger than Cecelia. I think Brian Hartnell was age 20 at the time of the stabbing, and Cecelia was 22. But, things are just very, very different in this particular case. Some other things that we can say about Cecelia Ann Shepard is she studied at Pacific Union College. She also studied at La Sierra University. And I was reading up on La Sierra University once just because of things connected to Cecelia Shepard and Lake Berryessa. I saw some bad things about that college, but still hope the best for them. And what we will talk about in a future thing called the Obsession into Darkness documentary series Part 3, available on the Zodiac Killer channel here. Hopefully you guys have heard Parts 1 and Part 2. But in the third part, they're going to be discussing some things about Cecelia Shepard and just hearing about how she was just such a nice person and just such a well-received person, and people really just viewed this as a loss and a tragedy. But, she was someone who was very well revered by her peers. And this is over on a different website called myheritage.com. Let's hear what they have to say about Cecelia Ann Shepard. Cecelia was a victim of the Zodiac Killer who terrorized Vallejo in San Francisco between 1969 and 1974. Really, it's 1968 up to perhaps 1978. But when they say 74, they're talking about the Exorcist letter and some other stuff. The Zodiac Killer has only been linked to 6 murders in those 5 years. The Zodiac Killer, who taunted police with encrypted letters, has never been caught. Police suspected that he became too old to kill or died. Cecilia's case and that of 5 others was made into a box office smash hit entitled Zodiac, released in March of 2007, that starred Jake Gyllenhaal, as well as people like Robert Downey Jr. and Mark Ruffalo, but we don't really have to go down that pathway too much. Let's look at some of the things that they have said here, though, about this situation. Police suspected that he became too old to kill or died. Cecilia's case and that of the 5 others made it into the movie. Too old? The canonical crimes, the confirmed incidents in Zodiac activity all take place from 1968 to 1969. Yes, I've heard this before, and even back when we were talking about some of the suspects like Ross Sullivan, it was just like perhaps the Zodiac was never apprehended because he died in 1977. Or who was it? Was it Tony Tola, the Zodiac suspect that died in 1974? So it's like, that is something that has been mentioned rather frequently, that perhaps the Zodiac Killer did die shortly after. But as far as too old, if we were entertaining the possibility of a single perpetrator in this, not talking about the group murder theory or the Zodiac hoax theory, multiple killers, 4 horsemen theory, which I'd love to do an upload on in the future, the 4 horsemen theory, which just means that there are 4 different people, 4 quadrants in the Zodiac symbol, 4 horsemen theory. If we put those aside for now and look at a single perpetrator, I was really beginning to suspect that we were going to be looking at somebody who was on the younger side as opposed to being too old. But with serial killers, from going through the literature, some of the things that we have noticed are that the killers are very big on predatory instincts. And if they believe that if they keep doing these crimes, they will get captured. And they're like, okay, that was too close of a call. I'm not going to do this again. Like the predatory instinct tells them that the risk is not worth chasing the desire. This is something that is explored very frequently in serial killer literature. And I would point everybody to our uploads on the psychology of serial killers, the neuroscience of serial killers, where we can give some longer explanations about that. So one of the explanations that I heard, just from one of you guys in the comment section, was after the Paul Stein murder on October 11th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer murdered somebody in Presidio Heights, walked away from the taxi cab. One single gunshot killed Paul Stine, but then the Zodiac Killer just walks away in an urban area. That was an enormous risk. And one of the possibilities is that the Zodiac Killer is thinking, okay, I had my thrill killing, but the risk of getting caught has just been so much higher. Like, look at the previous incident, Lake Berryessa, where Cecelia Shepard was murdered, as well as the stabbing of Brian Hartnell. That's a big risk in itself, committing the crime in broad daylight, walking this 200-yard plus, stretch, wearing this Zodiac costume, like the hood with the sunglasses and the symbol on it. I mean, what if somebody was watching him from a distance, like keeping eyes on him while he was putting on the costume? Talk about risk. And let alone everything that's happening after that, leaving the scene with blood and the knife and a gun and all of that stuff. That's a big risk in itself. So the risks are just getting higher and higher and higher. And then this person is thinking, all right, I cannot do this again. If I'm going to be doing anything, it's going to be written activities in the letters and the ciphers. And that's really how the Zodiac is getting off on things. It's really not about getting his rocks off with a girl. It's really not about the great feeling that comes from killing man, hunting man, the most dangerous animal of all. It's more fun than hunting wild game in the forest. No, it's about the letters and the ciphers, the taunting, the teasing, showing intellectual superiority, showing psychological perseverance and magnitude. It's all of that, and it's really just about creating this type of serial killer legend persona. So I believe, anyway, those last sentences that I just said there, that is just my take on the subject, I guess you would say. But I think, though, that we should also just look at some other sources so we can just hear a variety of different things. And right now what I would like to do is to jump over to a different website, and we're going to ZodiacKillerFacts.com, and they did a post on September 27th, 2016 to talk about Cecelia Shepard and Brian Hartnell. September 27th, another anniversary post. 47 years ago, college students Cecelia Shepard and Brian Hartnell were sitting by Lake Berryessa enjoying a relaxing visit. They did not know that a man was nearby, watching and waiting for the right moment to set his plan in motion. Brian heard some noises and asked Cecelia to look around. She saw a man move behind a tree. Cecelia and Brian dismissed the man as harmless and did not notice that he had donned a dark hood featuring a symbol of a white crossed circle. The stranger came prepared with some pre-cut lengths of clothesline to restrain Brian and Cecelia. On his belt, a sheath and a foot-long knife, and the holster for a gun was on his belt, and the gun was in his hand. The man needed the gun to prevent Brian and Cecelia from running away. If you've ever seen the movie The Devil's Rejects, not to spoil anything, but there's a line that says, "The gun is all about mind power." Once they complied and were subdued, the man would no longer need the gun and could proceed with his plan. The hooded stranger moved toward the couple. Cecelia saw him coming and said, "Oh my God, he's got a gun." Brian and Cecelia watched as the hooded stranger walked down the narrow patch of land surrounded by water and blocked their only escape route. Oh, and yes, if you've seen the Zodiac Killer film, of course, from 2007, the David Fincher one, you'll see the geography of Lake Berryessa. But just getting on YouTube, like when we did the episode when we talked about how they pulled up a drone just to do an aerial viewing of Lake Berryessa, which really is not only connected to the Zodiac Killer incidents. I mean, a whole lot of news happens there. And you just put Lake Berryessa into Google, people are talking about it for all sorts of things, even tourism. And I was watching a tourism video where they're just using a drone to explore the area. Countless peninsulas, and it really would leave people in a lot of vulnerable places. Most people wouldn't be thinking about that, but there's just all of these peninsulas that surround the lake. And of course, there's the very famous water hole in Lake Berryessa. I mean, there's some great images online, as well as here on YouTube, video footage, videography as well. So what we would have then is that Brian and Cecelia started a conversation with the man, and then the man revealed that the gun was indeed loaded, confirming Brian's suspicions. So about this one, I mean, with Cecelia and Brian, what we can say is they were just two people who had a last-minute plan to go about their day, the weekend, right? They were originally going to go into the city, but they changed their plan at the last minute and decided to go to Lake Berryessa because of time restraints. Is it restraints or constraints? Time constraints, excuse me. There have been a lot of people out there that have been talking about Cecelia Ann Shepard and her connections to the other victims, Darlene Ferrin, as well as perhaps Betty Lou Jensen, and especially the unconfirmed Zodiac killer victim, Sherry Jo Bates. Why would they be saying this? Well, Cecelia Ann Shepard had connections to Riverside, California. And somebody else also shared some things with me that Tom Voigt had been talking about, how there is a high probability that there was a connection between Cecelia and Darlene Ferrin, and they're trying to establish this narrative that the female victims in the Zodiac Killer mystery, including Sherry Jo Bates, by they, I mean the internet, they're trying to say that the Zodiac Killer knew all of these victims, they all had a significant reason for being targeted, or you could simply go with the Gary Stewart Earl Van Best theory that they reminded him of a particular person, and that, okay, well, this is what she would have looked like if she had brown hair, this is what she would have looked like if she had blonde hair. And even if you get Gary Stewart off the table because he's an absolute fraud, he wrote The Most Dangerous Animal of All. We did a book discussion about that here on the channel if anyone would like to check it out. It's more about the female victims may have reminded him of somebody. A lot of people explore that, but in all their terms. Once again, if you just hear that Brian Hartnell and Cecelia Ann Shepard did not have a dead-set plan on going to Lake Berryessa, it really appears, though, that the victims were more or less chosen because they were in vulnerable places, and I'd be very curious to know what anybody would have to say about that. If you would like to drop your material in the comment section below, like, what do you think about that? Do you think the female victims were intentionally chosen, or do you believe that it was just out of convenience? They were just in vulnerable places like Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, and of course Lake Berryessa, where Cecelia Shepard was. Now we're going to jump over to ZodiacCiphers.com, and we're going to look at their words on Lake Berryessa and the murder of Cecelia Ann Shepard and the attack on Brian Hartnell. The Lake Berryessa attack differed from the previous two crimes, Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, in that the killer used a gun but then switched to a knife. And yes, this does say that Brian Hartnell was 20 years old and Cecelia Shepard was 22. We really got to look at that. Like, the first victims in the Zodiac Killer mysteries, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were teenagers. I want to say that just off the top of my head that Betty Lou was 16 and David Faraday was 17. And then you see that Darlene Ferrin was also in her early 20s, and Cecelia Ann Shepard was 22. And then Paul Stine, the oldest victim, is the final victim. That much we can say. The oldest victim was the final victim. Does that represent like the age of a person or something within a 12-month cycle, also following the seasons? Also, we need to keep in mind that the Zodiac Killer committed two murders, a double murder, on the 20th of December 1968, and went dormant for the winter, almost like representing just the winter itself, hibernation. And another big fact that we mentioned during our upload, Zodiac Killer Solstice theory, which I'll include a link to in the description box here, is that when you look at the Zodiac crimes, all of them occurred in either the summer or the fall. December 20th is still the fall because it's right before the winter solstice. Lake Berryessa, the fall. September 27th. The Paul Stine murder, October 11th, the fall. The only one that's in the summer is the Blue Rock Springs shooting that saw the murder of Darlene Ferrin. Okay, so let's go back to Zodiac Ciphers. Cecelia Shepard would later recall details to Deputy Dave Collins after the attack, to which Collins was recalling in the 2007 documentary. She said, "Brian and I were here on a blanket down by the water, and we were just enjoying the afternoon, having a nice time talking, and I saw this guy coming up and coming down the hillside. He seemed to stop and watch us, looking at us." Dave Collins asked Cecelia, "What distance, how far away?" To which Cecelia pointed and said, "That's about 200 and 300 yards. That's a big walk. Like we were saying that yesterday. You walk across 2 or 3 football fields. You'll see how long that is. That's where I first saw him. You also got to think about that, like the accessibility of the perpetrator to the crime scene. And then we continued enjoying the afternoon, watching the water, reading, and I glanced and I noticed that he was getting closer and closer. I was within 75 to 100 feet away, and I told Brian that the guy was coming here. She then looked again and said that he had gone. I said, "Where did he go?" She said, "He stepped behind a tree." This is still Cecelia. It sounds like Brian, though. And I said, "What did he look like?" And she said, "What color hair?" She said it was brown. What race was he? He was white. I said, how about his eyes? Could you tell me the color of the eyes? It looks like it's Cecelia, but it sounds like it's Dave Collins talking. And he had dark-rimmed glasses underneath the hood. But she said the hair hung down across the forehead, going through the eye hole. But the thing is, Cecelia Shepard also did talk about how the Zodiac Killer was probably around 5'11" or 6 feet tall. And that's very important because one thing that I learned from Drew Beeson on the Zodcast, also highly recommend his channel, is that the Zodiac Killer suspect, Lawrence Kane, turns out to be only 5'6". That's the first time I've heard that one, but when somebody's 5'6", you're not going to be mistaken for being 6 feet tall. You may miss a few things, but you won't miss 6 inches on a person. The same way that if somebody is 6'6", you wouldn't say that they are 6 feet tall. Physical descriptions, I mean, that's what I really love about how Drew can really kind of eliminate suspects based on just how the physical descriptions do not play into it. Highly recommend the Zodcast. But I think that we should also say that Cecelia was able to survive, and she did give some contributions on how the Zodiac looked, but also just to talk about her life in general. You know, she was someone who was 22 years old, who was going to be an up-and-comer in the world, as well as someone who didn't get to live the full opportunities of life. But more importantly, she became famous for a very morbid reason. And sometimes life is just very unexpected. So once again, we can say rest in peace to Cecelia Shepard. Thank you to everybody who listened to this upload. We did a similar one on the murder of Sharon Tate. We did the murder of Sharon Tate at the beginning of August 8th to be precise, and then on August 9th we did one called Remembering Sharon Tate, where we just said some more things in a memorial fashion. But people who are victims like this, they just become associated with a particular subject, and that's also gets tied in all the time. But that was the motivation for this upload, and I would just like to say thank you once again. If you would like to hear our upload on Zodiac Killer Solstice Theory, it is available in the description box here. And as always, you can like and subscribe. Those are the best ways you can support this channel. And I will see you guys on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.